Ladies and gentlemen, it's the Coronation Chicken.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, I'm Hennis and I'm the official Coronation Chicken. Mr. John decided not to make an episode of On the Track for today because he didn't want to coincide with the celebrations of the coronation of His Majesty King Charles. But as the official Coronation Chicken, I decided I would step in. Thank you, Ronnie Rooster, for your magnificent funfair. Now I want to go to our first clip, which is Mr. John talking about eagles. As I believe you mostly know, I have been a keen amateur naturalist nearly all my life, and I got my grounding, if you like, in British natural history during the 1960s, something which might be seen as being particularly peculiar as I wasn't living in Britain at the time. I was living in what was then the British Crown colony of Hong Kong. And this is a very, very, very shameless plug, but if you're interested in finding out more about my childhood in Hong Kong, about how I first got interested in both natural history and cryptozoology, and my early attempts at cryptozoological investigations, then check out my book, The Wild Colonial Boy, which is available from all good booksellers and from the CFZ bookshop, so check it out. But that is monumentally a rabbit hole I just took you down, because I'm not here to plug my book, I'm here to talk about eagles. But as I was saying, my grounding in British natural history came during the 60s, because even though I wasn't living here, I had a godmother and two grandmothers and a grandfather who were all sending me books for my birthdays and Christmas presents, which is something I like. I still prefer books as presents over pretty well anything else. And the books they sent me, because they knew I was interested in animals, were books about British wildlife, such as these, the What to Look For in Summer, Spring, Autumn and Winter series. And I found this page layout from What to Look For in Summer particularly amusing, because that is also the name of an album released a couple of years ago by one of my favourite rock groups, whatever groups they are, Belle and Sebastian. You really ought to check them out, they are very, very good. But again, I'm digressing back to books. And they also sent me, I forgot to actually mention that I had various aunts and uncles as well who also sent me books on natural history. And I'd amassed quite a nice collection of these things, quite a lot of which I still own, by the time I was 8 or 9. But anyway, they also sent me these books, the Observer's books, and I was particularly fond of the Observer's Book of Larger British Moths, the Observer's Book of British Birds, and the Observer's Book to Pond Life. And this is where most of my initial grounding in the study of British wildlife came from. Now, fast forward another 50 years to John Downes, who is no longer a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, excitable young fellow who took delight in everything as he explored the world around him, and he is now a bad-tempered old hippie with a bad attitude who does a web TV show twice a week. Yes, boys and girls! Me. Now, something as a cryptozoologist that has always fascinated me is the way that the wildlife that live in a particular biotope change over years. And I have said before, and no doubt will say again, that I think it is these changes in the animal inhabitants of particular places over the years which actually are responsible for quite a lot of the so-called mystery animal sightings over the years. And this week I've discovered something new, something which I think I want to share with you. Back when I first learnt about British wildlife, I was sad to read that there was only one species of eagle living in Britain, and that, the golden eagle, was only ever found in Scotland. I was sad because in Hong Kong there were half a dozen different species of eagle that could be seen, most prominently the white-bellied sea eagle. But in Britain, like I said, there was only the one. Now, we're always told that the wildlife of our planet is declining, and you would really have thought by this metric that now, 50 years later, there'd be none at all on the British list, or possibly just the one that we already knew about, the golden eagle. But no, if you look at the British list now, there are actually 4 species of eagle, and I find that really quite interesting. The white-tailed sea eagle, not to be confused with the one that I used to see in Hong Kong, which was a different species with a similar name, the white-tailed sea eagle was hunted to extinction in Britain just before the First World War. Now, this is something that I would like your help with, because I read a book many years ago that had a photograph in it of an albino sea eagle, and it said that this pure white-tailed sea eagle, which wasn't just white-tailed, it was completely white sea eagle, was the last native British sea eagle to have existed here until it was shot. Now, I can't find either that book or that picture, so if any of you can send me what book it's in and preferably a scan of the photograph, I would be very, very grateful indeed. White-tailed sea eagles started to be reintroduced into Britain in the 1970s. There had been some earlier attempts at reintroduction, but they've been massively unsuccessful. But now they are back as Britain's largest species of bird of prey. They're not only found in Scotland, where they were first reintroduced to, but they have even been found, because they will roam over quite a long range, and they've even been seen in North Devon, where I saw one back in 1979. They've also been reintroduced to the Isle of Wight, and if you're interested in the progress of this reintroduction program, you can read all about it on Twitter. I find Twitter a fascinating way of getting hold of information. It's just advisable you stay clear of all the Twitterati shouting at each other. But now let's have a look at the spotted eagle. This is a species about which I know a little bit because of a remarkable lexilink. Do you guys know what lexilinks are? I would sincerely hope so, but if not, way back in the dim and distant past, about 30 years ago, my first wife and I were in the Cornish Studies Library in Redruth. We were looking into a story which had spread across a load of bits of the Fortean literature, the canon of Fortean literature, about a huge bird that had apparently attacked 2 young men in a place called Mount Hawke near Redruth in Cornwall. And so we went there to see if we could find out any more about it. The inference had always been that this was something like the Owlman, some sort of great bird-feathered humanoid or bird-headed humanoid that was part of the ancient mythos of pagan Cornwall. When we finally found the original reference, it was nothing like this. It was a story about how two boys had gone exploring some forests on Mount Hawk, and they'd found what looked to be a large injured goose which had pecked at them and cut one of the boys' hands. This was a bit of a anticlimax, but it did underline, if any underlining was needed, that it's always important to go back to the source material. However, whilst we were looking at strange birds on Mount Hawk, we came across a reference from memory from about 1885 of a spotted eagle, an incredibly rare visitor to the British shores, which, as far as I know, had not been recorded before this, and the eagle was found on Mount Hawk. And that beautiful lexi-link made me laugh so much we nearly got kicked out of the library. And this brings us on to why I'm doing this story about eagles today, apart from the fact they've always fascinated me. And that is because last week it was all over the rare bird alerts that a short-toed serpent eagle, which is a species I do recognise because it's a very closely related species of serpent eagle which can be found in Hong Kong. A short-toed serpent or snake eagle was filmed in Sutherland in the very north of Scotland. And I was totally amazed by this, and I looked, and there were another specimen claimed from last summer, from August 2021, further south in Scotland. And I wonder if it's the same specimen. One would hazard a guess that it probably is. But it's an absolutely fantastic record for Britain. And as far as I know, the last one seen before this was 1999, and there's only been a handful of sightings ever in Britain. So that brings us up to date on the subject of eagles in the United Kingdom. And I hope I haven't bored you too much by rabbiting on about one of the things that fascinates me. But hey, it's my web show, and I can do what I damn well like. I like eagles, and if you don't like eagles, I'll be seeing you. And now we have a special guest. It's Archibald Archimedes, the Archimandrite Stand, otherwise known as Archie, and he's going to sing a song for you, especially composed for His Majesty's coronation.
Don't save the king. He's a nice old thing. He likes Jack Russell, and so does the Queen, so I want a royal warrant, if you know what I mean.
Stop it, Archie. It's King Charles's day. Stop making it all about you.
Yes, Archie. Who do you think you are, Meghan Markle?
And now Mr. John is going to talk about sharks in Essex. Goodness me. And now I want to go to another aquatic story, this time coming from none other than Miss Maxine, who's very good at pulling interesting things out of interesting hats. Look at this. I've always been interested in the Essex coast, mainly because when I was a boy I loved, I must admit I still do love, the books of Arthur Ransom, the Swallows and Amazons books, two of which are set along this coastline. And I've always been particularly fond of a book called Secret Water, which is set in what is now Hanford Water Nature Reserve. Just up the coast from the real Secret Water is a little town called Manningtree, which is on the estuary of the River Stour. But I'm sure I'm going to be told by serried ranks of angry Essex folk that the river is pronounced Stour or Stour or something, but it looks like Stour to me. And I think Stour makes it sound like the river that goes through Stourbridge. And that's the other side of the country. I went there once and had an amusing time, but that's another story. Back to the estuary of this particular river, however it's pronounced. The other day, and I'm recording this on the 14th of July, the other day somebody found or saw a shark, a true bona fide shark, swimming in the estuary. I've mentioned before in this show how I've always felt cheated when people talk about sharks, but they're actually talking about various types of dogfish or smoothhound, and that's exactly what this specimen is. But it's a pretty cool thing for somebody to find when they're down at the beach swimming, keeping themselves cool in this unseasonably hot weather, and they see a dorsal fin coming through the water towards them. It's pretty cool, even if the fish is only about 3 foot long and totally harmless to people unless you do really something stupid to it. But it's a great story, and thank you very much, Maxine, for giving it to me. And that's about it for this episode. Whilst on the subject of Arthur Ransom's books, I recommend them to anybody who likes stories set in the countryside in a gentler and more forgiving time than the one that we are unfortunate enough to live in today. I would also recommend the books of a lady called Julia Jones, who sort of took up the baton left by Arthur Ransom when he died in 1967 and ran with it, because she has written a whole series of books set on the same coastline in Essex, including this river here, and I think they are really something special, so I strongly recommend you check them out as well. I hope that you're enjoying this collection of clips, because next we've got Mr. Richard in the bath.
No, you idiot. He's in the town of Bath. He's not in the bath.
ASAP, the Association for Scientific Study of Anomalous Phenomena, was founded in 1981 and is generally considered to be one of the most important Fortean organisations in the world. They recently had their annual conference, and Richard Freeman was there both as a speaker and to cover the event for CFZ TV.
Here I'm interviewing Christian Lander, who is a Fortean researcher and a podcast host. And his talk was a valuable lesson in critical thinking, because it deals with something that has been classed as a UFO case, but in reality had a much more mundane explanation. Right, and we're here at the University of Bath at the ASAP conference, and this is Christian Lander. And Chris, can you tell us a bit about your talk today?
So yeah, I'm talking about an incident that happened in Nottinghamshire. It's called the Thunderbolt incident, and it is a case that finds itself sat in ufology, and I think has a much more grounded explanation in the end when you bring around the more likelihood of things that are happening in and around the case. But what is really interesting about the case is it sits as a UFO file that happened in 1987. It's gone completely under the radar, but it features every hallmark of ufology. So there is an incident that is seen in various forms in this sky. There's an object that appears to be doing manoeuvres over the lay of the land. It appears to do a loop-to-loop. It's seen manoeuvring, and it is seen to be struggling. There's an explosion in the sky. The object is then seen to collide with a building. It's then seen to collide with another building. It's then seen to come into the local woods. It then takes off again and then comes down a little bit closer to Amersley Hall, which I guess has its own stories. Following that, there's a military response. 45 minutes later, there's Chinooks in the air. There's a Chinook in the area, and there's gazelles and lynxes looking for this particular location. However, what's really interesting is that they then lock the area down for 4 days. So this entire area north of Nottingham, an area called Kirkby and Ashfield, is then locked down by the army, the fire service and the police service. They lock this entire area down. No vehicles are able to come in or out. So it sits as a prime example of every mark of ufology. However, it's literally gone under the radar. It came by my way as two people told me of their experiences with that case. One was a bus driver who told me he followed a military HGV recovery vehicle that was flanked by military vehicles out of the area, and another was a lady who was in her bedroom, and what she described was she thought it was actually an aircraft, a jumbo jet that she thought had crashed outside into the grounds because the explosion was that loud. There's a significant number of damages, buildings that were damaged, fire, scorched many buildings, many roofs, trees, and there was a person with a very, very unique perspective I'm going to talk about in our talk. But from this case, I've been able to piece together more information. The people who repaired those buildings, the people who actually were the fire service, the fire marshal and the attending officers. I've got their testimonies to what happened that day, and they paint a very interesting, different picture. The government has its own secrets to play in this, and I think it's going to play out in a really intriguing way today in my talk.
So, is the upshot of it, do you think this was something being tested by our military, or was it a foreign power?
No, it's more of a case of what was the response of the military is actually one of the key cruxes. So we appear to have a definite military response. That is definitely in the case of the local records. The 52 people whose testimony have managed to get recorded, the military response is accurate and is done. However, it's 45 minutes later, and what they respond with is a Chinook helicopter dropping off troops and a Gazelle. Sorry, as you said, it's described as being several Gazelle-like helicopters. It turns out they're Gazelles and Lynxes. So they were, with their powerful spotlights, looking for something. That is not, if we are to believe that this is a ufology case and this was a craft from our own, or whether it was craft from wherever, that wouldn't be the response. I actually managed to get hold of a military defence document from 1987 about the tactical response interception of a foreign bogey, what vehicle we would send and how they would deal with maintaining air superiority. And these are recovery vehicles. They are clearly looking for something they know to be there, and this is a recovery operation of something they know has now crashed. So it was not an interception, and I think that actually plays into the story in a really intriguing way, and I'd like you to know more.
Oh, goodness. Well, I'll look forward to it. Thanks a lot.
No.
Richard will be back in next week's On the Track Extra with more from the ASAC conference. I've just noticed something very peculiar and ever so slightly Fortean when listening to Richard's conversation with Chris for the first time. The story which he tells is horribly similar to the plot of my first novel, The Blackdown Mystery, which was written over 20 years ago and published, can't remember when I published it, I think it was published 22 years ago. And the big thing about The Blackdown Mystery is that I made nearly all of it up. And in a weird example of life imitating art, the same scenario, or very, very similar scenario, played out a decade and a bit before in Nottinghamshire. And finally, we have Mr. Richard telling us the story of his encounter with a very tall creature with too much hair. And no, we're not talking about Mr. John.
The time is 11:32 a.m.
Well, as you may remember, Richard Freeman was here with me a few days before the expedition embarked to Sumatra. And while he was here, I got him to tell me one of my favourite stories of his life as a monster hunter, when he and other members of his expedition to Russia may well have had a very close encounter with a mystery hominin.
John, young people don't need Russian hominins. Everything's about Ukraine now. We're looking at Ukrainian sunflower hats and cheesy t-shirts that say Hi Mars on them.
I remember you telling me ages ago, Richard, that when you were in Russia for the first time, you had a very close encounter with what might have been an almasty.
Yes, this could have been the closest I've ever been to a cryptid. What happened was, we were staking out an old abandoned farmhouse several miles outside of the village of Neutrino in the Caucasus Mountains of Russia. This was 2008, and this old farmhouse, it had been abandoned since 1973, and it consisted of 3 rooms and an L-shaped veranda that ran outside of them. Almasties were reported to lurk around it. There was one story from about 8 years prior to that, where a bunch of shepherds had been standing on the veranda one evening when the door at the end of the veranda opened and a 7-foot almasty was there. It walked along the veranda, according to the story, picked up one of the men, moved him out of the way, carried on to the end of the veranda, jumped off and disappeared into the forest. And one of the people that was on our expedition, the Ukrainian archaeologist Anatoly Serendenko, said he saw an almasty there, a 7-foot tall grey almasty, a number of years before, and it was walking through long grass, and he said it was lifting its legs up high as it was going through the grass with this weird gait. Anyway, we set up camera traps and we put out meat and fruit and red wine mixed with honey, which is something the almasty is supposed to like. And then we staked out this old abandoned farmhouse. And there was myself and Adam Davis and Anatoly and Dave Archer. And it got to about 10 o'clock at night, and I heard a twittering noise like a bird, but it was dark and there should have been no birds about. And one of the noises the almasty is supposed to make is this twittering noise like a bird. Gregory Panchenko, when he saw an almasty in an old barn, a different farmhouse, it had been torn down long ago, but he saw one in the 90s and he said it was making this twittering noise. And another witness we spoke to, an old lady who'd seen one just after World War II, said it was making this twittering noise like a bird. Well, we heard this twittering noise and we saw the flash of one of the camera traps go off, and I thought to myself, goodness me, could that be what I think it is? So we sat there in silence, nothing more happened, and it got to around 2 in the morning, and we went inside to warm ourselves around this old-fashioned range that was still in one of these rooms. And Dave fell asleep on a manky old mattress. And Adam and I were sitting down by this old range, and the door to this room was slightly open. It was a few inches ajar, and moonlight and starlight was coming in. It was a reasonably clear night, and moonlight and starlight were all coming in. Suddenly I hear this deep vocal noise, this deep vocalization that sort of goes bub 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 bub. I can't replicate it, but it sounds like something with big lungs, and it had a reverberating sort of feel to it. And I said to Adam, did you hear that? And he said, yeah. Then about 25 seconds later, something walked along the veranda, and whatever it was on 2 legs, because as it passed the door, it blocked out the moonlight and the starlight to a height of 7 foot plus. So whatever it was on 2 legs and it was 7 foot plus tall. And I said to Adam, it's out there on the veranda. We grabbed our cameras and went rushing out to be greeted by nothing but darkness and silence. It had disappeared into the night, and we did a circuit of the farm and the outbuildings, and we could find nothing. None of the bait had been disturbed. It wasn't a bear, because a bear wouldn't have been walking on its hind legs, and you'd have heard its claws against the wood of the veranda as well. When we checked the camera traps in the morning, all we got was vegetation moving about. So I can't put my hand on my heart and say I was, 12 foot away from an almasty, but I don't know what else it could have been. It wasn't a human being, it was too small. A human being would have been too small. This was a 7 foot plus, and it wasn't a bear, because a bear wouldn't have been on 2 legs, and it would have made a lot more noise. So there you go. That's the closest I've been to an almasty, I think.
That's just about it for this episode, this special coronation episode. So all that is left for me is to wish good King Charles a happy reign, and God save the King. And now this happens. The last time I sang this song, Judith Jane wrote, there are 4 countries in the UK, you old goat. So I rewrote the lyrics to placate UD, and to showcase an issue that means lots to me. It's only in Britain that the CF will have turned into the thing that was inside my head. 'Cause my original vision was a very strange thing. So, rule Britannia, and God save the King. 'Cause the British are best. I wouldn't give tuppence for none of the rest. The British are best. I wouldn't give tuppence for none of the rest. Shows about animals and other strange things, but this week we're here to say God save the King. We're not talking about birds or bears or narwhals. We're here to congratulate with King Charles. 'Cause the British are best. I wouldn't give tuppence for none of the rest. The British are best. I wouldn't give tuppence for none of the rest.